EdgeX Foundry Tech Talk. We'll be doing a deep dive on the device service SDK today. So some things we're going to cover today. We're going to go over how to actually generate your new device service. We're going to go over our service configuration file, what you actually get when you generate something with the SDK. So what do we support and what services inside of EdgeX is that talking to? Then we're going to talk about what you have to do afterwards. Just go over a quick recap on the device profile, give you some quick links on where to go for more information, and then talk about what's up next for EdgeX. So my name is Tyler Cox. I'm a software engineer at Dell. I've been on EdgeX since it was still called Fuse as a southbound developer. I wrote most of the device services you see out there today, including the SDK. So feel free to reach out to me directly if you have any questions about any of these things. All right, so today we're going to be talking about the SDK, which is not a service, but will help you generate all of the things in this layer, in our device services layer. So diving right in, what do you need to do to generate a new device service inside of EdgeX? Well, it's pretty straightforward. So you pull down our device SDK tools repo, which is a really simple Java project. That just has a whole bunch of template code in there for generating the new service. Then you're going to import that project into Eclipse. You're going to modify your service configuration file, which I'll go over in a minute. And then you just run the project. And bam, you have your new device service project generated, ready to compile and start developing on. Right now, you're going to follow some numbered to-dos that are in your new project. We're going to look at doing some more sophisticated things with that and continue improving that in future iterations. The other thing to note is right now our SDK is in Java. We're looking at other language or supporting other languages in the near future as well, in addition to the Java SDK. So your service configuration file, what you're going to configure is your service name. So inside of EdgeX, we kind of have a nomenclature at the service level that has your layer name, which is going to be device or core, support, or export. And then you're going to actually have the protocol name. This case. So we have device Bluetooth, we have device BACnet, we have device Modbus, are all existing services today. You're going to define your service port just for the default implementation that can always be changed later with configuration of the application.properties file. You're going to configure any service labels you may have, and that's really just used at the northbound services. So you might have some rules engine queues that are firing off of service labels. You might have some things in the cloud that really just make it easier to organize. You get to configure whether you want to build scheduling into your service, which really just takes our service, our scheduling code and drops it into your new project. Or if you want to break that out, you're welcome to run with the existing scheduler service. And we do provide hooks to do that as well. So that's just a configuration setting. And then the most important part about the service configuration file is you're going to define something we call the profile attributes. And so what these are is the metadata elements that are used by the protocol library that you're building your device service on top of in order to talk a particular protocol. So this is where you're going to put in, I need UUIDs for something like Bluetooth LE. You're going to drop in something like holding registers for Modbus. You might have instances and types. For SNMP, this is all your protocol-specific goodness. And what this really is for a particular type of device. So let's say I have a particular model of a temperature sensor. I need to know how to actually get to that information on the device. And so this is going to be whatever the address information is within the device that your protocol library is going to be using to access it. So really, the picking of the protocol library is going to be your most important part about generating a new device service. So be sure to do that before you start with the SDK, just so you know what you need here on the profile attributes section. So now you've generated your new device service as the SDK. So what did you get? So inside this purple box right here are all the things that our templated code has produced for you. And so that's got things like our controllers, which handle the REST APIs and implement those. We've got our handlers, which route our commands and other controller interfaces to the actual logic. We've got our data transformation layer, which handles some basic data cleanup and reformatting. We've got our local cache of the metadata, so you don't have to keep running back to metadata every time you make a call. And that's kept consistent with our callbacks mechanism from metadata. And then we've got our stubbing out for our driver interface that you're going to layer your protocol library, which shown here is the driver implementation, underneath. And so what features do the SDK support? So we support synchronous read and write operations. So you get a command and you read or write to a device. In some cases, it may be reading or writing multiple things. We support asynchronous data flow from devices. So if you have a smart device that's broadcasting however often, it doesn't matter. You can use the SDK and some of the hooks we've built in there as a framework for passing that data back up the stack. We've got hooks in for initialization and deconstruction of our driver interface. So if you need to initialize any hardware on your device or in a dongle or any setup protocols, that can all be done there. We've got hooks for initializing and disconnecting devices. So not just simply disconnecting from a Bluetooth device, but maybe you need to flip it to low power mode first or make it rediscoverable. So we provide some hooks for allowing you to execute things at that time. We've got a framework in place for automated device discovery. This discovery piece we talked about in the metadata part 2, which is Tech Talk 5 as well. But just a quick recap. So we have a framework in place for device discovery. Device discovery is very protocol dependent. And so some protocols do have mechanisms for discovering new devices. Some of them don't. If yours does, you just plug in whatever that mechanism is and into the device, into the bottom of the SDK. We support multiple types of devices using device profiles. So you may have different Bluetooth devices from different manufacturers that speak different ways. They may pass you the same data, but accessing them is usually not done in a uniform manner. So we abstract that out with device profiles. So you can write one device profile for a given class of devices and handle both of those types of devices with the same service. We support multiple actions being triggered by a single command. So you might want to just have one command that gets all of the readings from a device. And that may fan out to, in some of the multi-sensor cases, 13 individual readings with gyros and accelerometers and magnetometers. And as an operator, maybe you don't care, you just want all of that at once. Or you can have fine-grained control and pull up individual things. And then we also support cached responses to queries. If you have a device that is going to be a low power, it's going to broadcast once an hour, if you don't want to wake the device up or something like that, we do allow you to serve up cached responses. So the services that the Device Service SDK pre-wires you to talk to. So we handle all the communication with metadata. So that includes initialization of your service objects, your addressables, your device objects. It also handles things around the consistency with callback mechanisms. It handles your operating state transitions, admin state transitions, and those are both bottom up and top down. So if your device service notices that a device goes offline, it can flip the operating state and metadata and notify, and that will trigger your alerts and notifications and other higher order effects up the stack. We handle your core data elements, so that includes things like your value descriptor initializations. It handles events or creating events and readings from your devices. And then handles actually the passing of the data. We implement the interface for commands, and so that allows for things like the rules engine and other northbound services to actually actuate in devices. So if you want to pull a temperature reading on demand, you go through the command service, and that API is implemented by the SDK for your device service. We implement our console, which is the config and registry default, a reference implementation for EdgeX. So this does things like health checks. It shows where the service is, handles updating configuration parameters, things of that nature. We also plug you into loggings or into the logging service. So when you come up, you start logging, it'll show up locally and it'll be sent to the logging service. And then the other thing is the scheduling service. So we handle if you need to provision some default schedules every time your device service comes up. Depending on whether you flip that scheduling block when you generated your service, that can either run inside of your service or outside. Either way, you can write your default schedules and schedule events into a configuration file, and that will get uploaded to metadata when your service comes up. So what's left for you to implement? So first step, you're going to plug in your protocol library. So there's a couple different things you have to wire up there, and that's covered in more detail in our SDK Getting Started guide. It is on the wiki, and it's linked in the back of this presentation. You get to implement device discovery if that is something that's supported and something you desire to support. You get to configure your default schedules and schedule events, and then also any default provision watchers, which are a discovery object. And then you get to just write some device profiles for the devices that you want to support. And we do encourage organic growth of the device profiles. So if there's a service out there that exists and you just want to add support for a new device that speaks that protocol, go ahead and write a device service, or sorry, a device profile. Don't worry about writing a new device service. And then if you want to, you're welcome to commit or contribute that back to the EdgeX community at large. So device profiles, we did a deeper dive of that in the metadata part 2 Tech Talk 5 presentation, which is back on the wiki as well, as are all of our Tech Talks. They're recorded and the original slides are out there for you to consume. So what is a device profile? It tells your device service how to interface with a particular class of devices. And so the things you define there are your commands. which tell the northbound services what they're able to call upon. So right now it's used for your REST API definitions. So I have a temperature command. I may have a set temperature command. I may just have a get everything command, really device dependent. You implement your resources, which is how the service should handle the commands. So that would deal with any multiple actions being triggered by a single command. So multiple reads, multiple writes, any configuration, even using the results of one read to populate some parameters from another write. So if you wanted to write a command that just sets your temperature point to be 2 degrees above whatever your current temperature reading in, you're able to do that with the resources. And then the device resources are defining the actual register or addressability of the device itself. So it might tell you this particular UUID. At that UUID, you're going to get a accelerometer X reading that's going to be in these units. We may have to run it through some basic transforms because maybe it's in binary. All of that can be defined in the properties of the device resources section. As a quick note, all of our device profiles for the current device services are out there in the source main resources directory. Some of the services have 3 or 4, some of them have 1, but we do have reference profiles out there for all of our services. So just point you to some additional resources here. So the main one is going to be the SDK Getting Started Guide that will walk you through step-by-step with screenshots about what you want to see in Eclipse at each particular stage of both generating the service and developing on it. So that's a relatively comprehensive guide. If you have any questions about that, be sure to shoot those back to me. We have our device service architecture section. So right now that consists of the virtual device service architecture, which CloudSide did a really great job of documenting all of that. So the virtual device service allows you to virtualize any endpoint devices you may have. It lets you configure what the values coming up from those devices should be. And it's a great way to test out or test out without actually writing a device service what it would look like hooking a particular virtualized device into the rest of EdgeX. And then we also have our reference device services, which have been out for a little while now. We've got MQTT, SNMP, Modbus, Bluetooth LE, we've got BACnet, and then we have a Fisher Technic device service for those of you familiar with that. You're welcome to discuss any of your questions about device services on the Device Services Rocket Chat channel, or you can communicate with me directly on Rocket Chat with @trcox. So look ahead. We're going to be suspending the Tech Talks until post-Barcelona release. So we'll restart in about mid-October. We're looking at potentially switching those up and going into more strategic discussions. As at this time, we're relatively close to having full coverage of the services with deep dives from the previous 9 Tech Talks. And feel free to email Jim or I suggestions or via Rocket Chat, GitHub, whatever your preference is. And I know we were pretty quick today, but I'll go ahead and open up for any questions you may have.
And folks, if anyone is trying to ask questions, the system auto mutes you when you first join, so you may need to come off mute or leverage the chat window if you're having issues with unmuting.
All right. Well, thank all of you for taking time to join up with us this morning or afternoon or late evening. And for those of you watching the recording, feel free to ask me any questions you may have. So thank you.
Thanks, Tyler.